everybody. It's Ashley.
And Bianca.
And we're Creep It Real. Thanks for joining us.
As always, just wanted to thank y'all real quick for the 5-star reviews that we received. It was kind of an influx of 5 stars, and
Bianca was shocked. I was not shocked, but I was very grateful.
Yeah, and I mean, I was very pleasantly surprised. And then we did receive another patron on our Patreon. Thank you so much, Elia, for donating to us. I can't tell you how much we both really appreciate that.
Yes, big time. This week, we are covering the Advanced Training Institute International, the Institute in Basic Life Principles, which all fall under the umbrella of Bill Gothard's ministry and his cult that he has cultivated since about the 70s. This cult is made up of people who identify as Christian Reconstructionists, which is a fundamentalist theonomic movement, which has had a significant influence on the Christian right in the United States, which essentially rejects every single thing in our established secular political framework wherein individual rights have any meaning. These folks think that freedoms, as we understand them, as Americans, are actually slavery to sin. They would like to dismantle the government as it is and establish a theocracy basing all social order on biblical law, including all the Old Testament bullshit. They are all about teaching people to bring all of their lives under the lordship of Christ and make every aspect of life under the authority of the Bible. The only true freedom is freedom in submission to God, is what they believe. People who adhere to this Reconstructionist mindset also want to get involved in political spheres so that they can continue on with the global takeover that we will talk about later in their philosophy, with the be fruitful and multiply so that they can fill the world with people who are just like them and subdue it. They believe Old Testament law should be in effect today, which we all know is ludicrous. And according to the Pew Research Center, 75% of non-denominational fundamentalists are white.
Bill Gothard was born in November of 1934 to William and Carmen Gothard.
He was raised, shockingly enough, in a strict Christian home. His father was a Gideon, which is the people that put Bibles in hotel rooms. I looked up the Gideons a little bit, and they really essentially are made up of men. It is businessmen that have kind of intertwined their job with the Bible. The criteria in order to be a Gideon is that you have to be a businessman, and a woman, a wife, can be kind of like an honorary member.
Bill was the third child out of 6. He became a Christian in 5th grade after having attended a child evangelism program. And at 15, he grew concerned over his classmates' poor decisions and decided to dedicate his life to working with troubled teens and their families.
Ugh. God.
He struggled immensely in public school, and he had to repeat the 1st grade and was almost forced to repeat the 2nd grade, his main issues being reading and retention.
And being a self-righteous dickhead.
I don't think that young. I think that comes later.
It seems like he kind of, if he was so concerned over his classmates' poor decisions,
that's true.
It was starting young.
That's true. Even though he didn't have to repeat the 2nd grade, he was on academic probation from that point forward until the 8th grade. And then when his sisters expressed to him they didn't want to be known for having a dumb brother, he dedicated 6 hours per night to homework. And then at that point, he continued having average grades. In high school, some woman he knew told him that he should memorize scripture on a regular basis if he wanted to be successful. And she gave him booklets with about 20 verses to memorize each week and then quizzed him on them. After
Who
learning,
is this lady?
The only thing that I said was a woman that he knew.
Cool. Okay.
Well, after learning how to retain information, he miraculously got A's in high school. So, hallelujah.
It kind of makes me think that his bad experience that he had in school went to color the way he felt about public education later in life, I would say.
I completely agree. And, you know, if there was at the time in the time that he was growing up, if there were teachers like there are today who understand that all people learn in different capacities and in different ways. Mm-hmm. Maybe everything he did wouldn't have happened.
We'll see. He's kind of a
psycho. I know.
Okay.
As a senior in high school, he placed 2nd in a contest held by the Future Scientists of America, which granted him membership. He also won a book writing contest. In 1954, Bill graduated from Lyons Township High School as a member of the National Honor Society and was offered a scholarship to Harvard University, supposedly.
I don't know about that, Bill.
So, although he was offered the scholarship, which I don't know if you've heard of Harvard, but it is one of, if not the most prestigious and well-known Ivy League colleges in the United States, he ended up going to Wheaton College in Illinois. But no doubt because that particular college boasts on its website that it is a Christian residential liberal arts college and graduate school.
So he received a Bachelor's of Arts in Biblical Studies in 1957 and then a MA in Christian Education in 61 from Wheaton.
In the 1950s, Gothard began his career as a youth minister, and this was during a time in which it was an ideal situation to build a career in the youth ministry movement, as this movement called Youth for Christ was formed in 1945. And this was after World War II had resulted in millions of absentee fathers, and society had become more and more alarmed with youth gangs, rivaling the tales of Al Capone and John Dillinger. While in college in 1961, he organized undergraduate students to organize Bible studies in Chicago area public schools, which he called campus teams. He ran the organization out of his home in LaGrange. This allowed him to gather data for his master's thesis.
And who knows what else.
Right.
God, okay.
After seeing successes with his campus teams throughout his master's program, Bill Gothard developed a list of 7 biblical principles that he felt would result in a harmonious life in all areas.
Which we'll talk about later.
He was ordained in 1964 and commissioned for youth work, which led to his first seminar, Basic Youth Conflicts at Wheaton College. Now, the 60s and early 70s was a time of rapid change, and parents were desperately trying to find some sort of direction in which to raise their children. Gothard was the, quote, man with the plan, and he had a message of one word: authority.
So basically it was like, there's somebody here who has some sort of answer, so let's just go with him.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. A large part of Gothard's appeal was his willingness to essentially die on the hill for which he stood during a time in which convictions everywhere were giving way to confusion. And when I say convictions everywhere, I mean things like civil rights. Mm-hmm. It was confusing that humans wanted to have the same rights as other humans.
Yeah, it's very confusing.
Gothard was viewed as courageous because he alone was willing to stand up to the youth of the day who were starting to reject the notion of establishment.
God, he is the biggest kiss ass. I just cannot.
By 1973, Bill Gothard and the IBLP had become extremely popular due in large part to Gothard's strategy for marketing his own books and materials. Now, you could only get them by attending his seminars. Mm-hmm. Nothing over the counter at Christian bookstores. And if you wanted to sneak one to a friend, you couldn't, because the book is intended only for the use of those who go through the whole program. During the week-long seminar, there are 12 times when portions of the book are distributed. So this actually created the effect that no one who had not actually attended a seminar had access to what Gothard was teaching, meaning that very few people had the opportunity to objectively scrutinize his materials outside of his seminars.
You don't say.
So at his seminars, if you had a question, you were like, I don't really agree with this. Everybody else who didn't have that question was like, I don't really understand this, was like, what? What are you crazy? Mm-hmm. Furthermore, Gothard publicly discouraged attendees from even discussing the materials outside of his seminars.
VIPs only.
Absolutely. Kind of like, and I'm going to say this again, but it's kind of like with Scientology, how they're like, well, if you go up this particular path, you're going to see that this is the next step.
Yeah.
And you have to, there's a paywall that's associated with every next step. Mm-hmm. So that reminded me of that as far as that was concerned.
Yeah.
And as we see time and time again with cults, he, in 1974, changed the name of campus teams to Basic Youth Conflicts. Largely through word of mouth, this seminar rose to national attention. Seminars throughout the United States began seeing up to 16,000 attendees per 1-week seminar, with some cities hosting sold-out seminars twice a year.
Damn.
In 1989, Bill Gothard's successful Institute of Basic Youth Conflicts, IBYC, changed its name again to the Institute in Basic Life Principles, which is what we're pretty much talking about today, IBLP, which Bill was the president of, and he was also a member of the board. The organization grew to add a number of programs, including homeschooling curriculum, a law school, and over 60 ministries.
An unaccredited law school.
It is. I was looking for any sort of accreditation that any of the programs have. 0.
Of course.
And then, in 1984, Gothard founded the Advanced Training Institute, or ATI, which was a homeschooling program with a curriculum that is based on the Sermon on the Mount. For those of you who are unfamiliar, this particular sermon is a collection of sayings and teachings of Jesus Christ from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapters 5 to 7, and takes place relatively early in the ministry of Jesus after he has been baptized by John the Baptist. He's also, at this point, finished his fasting and his meditation retreat in the desert, and he's begun to preach in Galilee. The sermon is the longest continuous discourse of Jesus found in the New Testament and has been one of the most widely quoted elements of the canonical Gospels. It includes some of the best-known teachings of Jesus, such as the Beatitudes, which is the character of the people of the kingdom of heaven who are expressed as blessings, and the widely recited Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, yada yada. The Sermon on the Mount is generally considered to contain the central tenets of Christian discipleship.
On May 14th, 1980, Bill Gothard's Advanced Technology Institute International faced a major sex scandal when news broke that his brother Steve resigned after having affairs with several secretaries of the institute, to which he actually admitted. Bill was accused of knowing about the affairs, which he did know about for over 4 years, and didn't take any action, so he also resigned.
So this had actually happened after 4 years of trying to get Steve to answer for his behavior. And after the situation was brought before the board of the IBLP, which I just want to let you know was against Bill's direct orders. Bill knew about it. And after he criticized Tony Gurr, who was one of the 3 individuals who was intending to seek to confront Steve, Bill Gothard demanded that Tony stop checking out any more possibilities with additional secretaries who might have been involved because Steve was unmarried. Which somehow it would have been better if he was married?
I guess it was because he was trying to say it's not a scandal because he's not married, but it's different when you're in the middle of a organization that preaches that any kind of thought about sex outside of marriage is a mortal sin. So it's different when you're part of this extremely religious fundamentalist organization and you're sleeping with every secretary that you have.
Right.
Gothard himself admitted to having an addiction to masturbating, which in normal circumstances is like join the club, buddy. But like, again, I said, under normal circumstances, this is not. It is a fundamentalist organization that tells its members, at little children and teenagers going through incredible hormonal changes, that they are sinning terribly if they even think about kissing somebody. So it's just, it's one of those situations where it's like, this is the cult. This is what they tell everyone else. This is what they tell their members to do. And then the higher ups are out there doing whatever they want. Sleeping with every secretary they've got.
Which is shocking.
And masturbating like crazy.
Oh my God.
It's supposed to be a mortal sin.
They're like Ashley.
Yeah. we got Ashley's
with the black-eyed kids. Or not black-eyed kids. What? Shadow people.
Okay, all right. I'm like, no, I'm not masturbating for black-eyed children.
Shadow people, sorry. Bill Gothard himself was actually reported to the Los Angeles Times as having been, quote, seen by staff members patting and fondling women employees. Later, he admitted in staff meetings that these were moral failures on his part. Yeah.
But, we'll get into it later. Just how, let's just make a note, everyone, about how little responsibility he takes for that, really.
Oh, it's great. It's not great, but it's great.
In juxtaposition to what he teaches his followers to take on. Mm-hmm.
So he returned 3 weeks later, and he emerged stronger and more in control than ever, if you can actually believe that. And in fact, Tony, who we spoke about a couple minutes ago, who was in charge of approaching Steve about his moral reprehensibilities, was fired in July of 1980.
I can believe that.
I do too. You see, Gothard essentially rejected the authority of the IBLP board since he didn't like the taste of his own medicine and adheres to nobody aside from God. In fact, the pastor of Gothard's own home church, Pastor E. Hovey, declined getting involved in any of the scandal, stating that, quote, Bill Gothard has never been under the authority of the local church, either as a member or a Christian leader. It is a serious matter to hold others to a standard that you refuse to subject yourself to. Even though, quote, other people, such as single young women and single young men and women staffers, would be booted out of the organization for breaking Gothard's rule against dating, he would not adhere to his own standards.
Yeah, well, just like every other cult leader there is.
Again, shocking. Bill Gothard's personal secretary even detailed in a 10-page account in 2 class action lawsuits filed against the Institute, citing personal grievances that he twisted scripture to achieve total control over her mind and emotions, further said that he dictated to her how to compose letters to her parents, her personal nail care, her makeup and dress, which friendships she could develop, whether she could date or marry, and where and with whom she was allowed to even spend her free time.
And this is a pattern that he had established with these girls that he had invited to come work with him at the headquarters that we'll talk about later in more detail.
Yep.
So Gothard was the president and board member of IBLP until his resignation in 2004. And then, in 2004, he got his PhD in biblical studies from Louisiana Baptist University, a theologically Christian university located in Shreveport, Louisiana, that is unaccredited by the United States Department of Education, which only grants non-secular degrees for use in various ministries. So,
So nothing. So you received nothing.
not anything that serious. Okay, so the intro to the basic teachings of Gothard and the IBLP, they're designed to help the individual, quote, view all of life through God's perspective, which for believers of God may not sound so terrible. But let's get a little bit more into the details of this before we start making, any judgments, because it's kind of, it turns into an abusive situation pretty fast.
As I was reading this, I was like, oh, this doesn't sound so bad. And especially when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, I was super heavy into my church. Literally going on Wednesdays to the youth services, Thursdays to the night services, Saturdays to the night services, and Sundays the morning services. All of this sounds like, okay, whatever. I mean, I no longer subscribe to those particular ideologies. However, as when I was in the throes of learning about the gospel, none of this seemed terrible until we get deeper into this.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely some stuff that growing up in like a Southern Baptist environment, I was like, oh, I remember this. I definitely remember this.
Right.
Yeah, but it's definitely not okay as we get along into it.
Absolutely.
So, IBLP, the Institute for Basic Life Principles, is a non-denominational Christian organization. Like I talked about earlier, it's a fundamentalist Christian organization in Oak Brook, Illinois, that serves as an umbrella organization for several different ministries under Bill Gothard's what he decided was what God's word was. Their stated purpose is to provide instruction on how to find success in life by following biblical principles. Their logo is a fucking eagle flying with a Bible in its claws. So if anybody wants to like go check that out, it is the most I was like, I mean, you know, like edgelord metal like situation. It is exactly what I would expect.
Unsurprisingly, the ATI, which is what the IBLP was later, or
it's two different organizations, but the ATI is actually, I think, what the homeschooling situation was under.
Yeah, which is a little facet or arm.
Well, and honestly, this Bill Gothard's ATI, the IBLP, the ministry that he created, that he wrote, it was the foundation for almost like, I think it was something like 90% of homeschooling curriculum in the 80s and 90s or something like that.
Jesus.
So, great.
So the ATI is a Christian fundamentalist homeschooling system that lets Christian families integrate the kids' daily moral learnings with just a little bit of secularism.
Mm-hmm.
The Institute teaches a rigid hierarchy where God comes first, men come second, women are third, and children are at the very bottom. Its various pillars include doing exactly what's expected, quote, instantly and cheerfully, not asking questions, strict adherence to patriarchal standards, and, of course, shielding yourself from any influence or human that might lead you off the beaten path. Mm-hmm. Now, as our listeners are so much like this, you might be asking yourself, how do I join this? Mm-hmm. Well, after paying a $25 processing fee to ATI preliminary and $675 for the first year of tuition, husband, wife, and children all have 2 seminars to attend. The basic seminar and the advanced seminar. And here kids get to interact with their gender-specific peer groups, freeing them from distractions as they go through military training light for boys. And later they can join a program called Alert. Mm-hmm. Only if they're 17 or older, unmarried, and have completed high school. And of course, if they have $10,200 to $12,400 to go through the 9-week course.
Oh, very affordable.
Super affordable. From the website, it states, the Air Land Emergency Resource Team is a Christian discipleship and service program that trains young men to meet needs in times of crisis. Alert will help you grow physically and spiritually, teach you to be ready to serve with a Christ-like attitude, and train you with skills you can use wherever God's calling takes you.
I guarantee that these people would be like super gung-ho at the scene of the flood, and like the real people who were there as emergency responders would be like, kids, get the fuck out of the way. Get out of the way.
Move. And for the girls, you can learn to sew and sit quietly.
Oh! Thank goodness. I didn't think I could take that, the whole Alert situation.
But ladies, listen up. Don't feel left out. At 15 or older, you can join a 3-week outdoor adventure program for only $1,200. Now, after applying with a personal photograph taken within the last 6 months.
What?
And a family photograph taken within the last 6 months. And completing the 13-page application, which includes questions like, do you have anybody to confide in? And if so, what is their relationship with God?
What?
If you are accepted, you can join a 3-week outdoor adventure program. Right? Mm-hmm. So if you're accepted, you can learn life skills such as basic electrical, basic plumbing, general home maintenance, painting techniques, basic auto maintenance such as roadside emergency and routine maintenance.
What are you going to learn in that? How long does it take you to learn how to change a tire and fill up a gas can?
Listen up. Maybe calling AAA is part of that.
There's 3 skills.
Financial planning, which includes basic financial terms, budgeting, and personal money management.
Oh, lest you forget, we require that in your money management, you donate 25% to the church.
25?
I don't
Usually
know.
it's 10. That's expensive.
I know, tithing. I think it's 11 is what they say.
Oh, is it 11?
I think it's 11.
And as far as emergency skills are concerned, you too can learn personal safety awareness, orienteering, whatever that is. And most importantly, basic canoe handling and water safety.
Oh, important.
This is among learned daily devotionals from the book of Philippians.
Okay, good.
However, as of 2020, it will no longer be sponsored by Alert. So we'll see what excitement does lie in store for us.
What will the church army isn't sponsoring the outdoor group anymore?
No.
What happened there?
I don't know.
Okay.
The ATI program itself, though, is made up of a series of 54 what are called wisdom booklets and optional supplementary packets that theoretically could make up the entirety of any good righteous child's education.
Sure. Well, yeah. Well, we'll expound on that a little bit more. So when putting together his ministry program, Gothard focused on 3 root problems of character, which he decided were bitterness, greed, and moral impurity. Which, of course, the root cause of these is resisting God's grace or not being a good enough Christian, violating scriptural principles. This works out perfectly for him, as it teaches that he's the only one who is able to interpret God's intention for the world, and thus they must defer to him for how to live their lives. By establishing that knowledge is inherently bad and that Gothard himself is the only one able to interpret God's word in order to tell you how to properly and righteously live your life, he ensures that it will be very difficult for any of his followers to question him or his program. Setting himself up as his followers' go-between with God and their best lives is a huge aspect of why his program was so effective, and still is, actually.
Yes,
as I've seen, there's like a ton of people out there that just defend the crap out of him.
Yeah.
His primary teaching in his basic seminar, which focuses on what he refers to as the 7 basic life principles, which he came up with back in college, which are design, authority, responsibility, suffering, ownership, freedom, and success. Now, let's start with the design principle. The design principle, which is that people should understand their specific purpose for which God created them. He writes, a person's attitude towards himself has a profound influence on his attitude towards God, his family, his friends, his future, and many other significant areas of life. He also said, God has precise purposes for each person, object, and relationship which he established. Only as we understand and follow these will we find our identity and fulfillment in life. Okay. By getting followers to believe that he himself has the answers to how they need to live their most holy lives, he is able to completely control every aspect of their life, from the way they dress to their romantic relationships to their business relationships, based solely off of his preferences, not anything that's actually a fact.
This reminds me of, I was listening to a podcast recently about the Order of the Solar Temple.
Mm-hmm.
It was last podcast on the left.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what that leader said too, is that he alone could figure out which kind of relationships they could cultivate.
Yeah. How convenient.
That's so convenient.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because, I mean, essentially it sets the groundwork for him to be able to control every single aspect of their lives.
Well, knowing what we know now about like Jonestown and stuff, it definitely kind of harkens back to that kind of thing. And you kind of get that feeling of like, I'm going to do the noise again. This isn't good.
No, definitely not good. No. At the outset, you might be able to say, well, this guy's really not that bad. But like the way that he has set up the ministry, what they're supposed to live by is just so abusive. And we'll hash it out more as we go, but it's just so abusive. So the next 7 of the 7 principles is the authority principle. And that inward peace results when people respect and honor the authorities, which are the parents, the government, etc., that God has put into their lives. It is based on the idea that God gives direction, protection, and provision through human authorities, which Bill Gothard has designated himself as the ultimate authority between humans and God. And then, as we'll get into it further, you know, all the men are next, very immediate next in line. Which, as all of you, I'm sure, who have listened to the podcast at this point know, is going to get us riled. It's going to get us riled up. So the next principle is the responsibility one. And it is that a clear conscience results when people realize that they are responsible to God for every thought, word, action, and motive. Part of this principle is asking forgiveness from whomever has been offended so that no one can point a finger at you and say, "You've offended me," and never asked for my forgiveness. He also says that God holds us personally responsible for every one of our words, thoughts, actions, attitudes, and motives. Therefore, whenever we sin, there must be confession and proper restitution. Jesus. It's like it is something that I have read from people, firsthand accounts over and over from people who were raised in this church, that the abuse is like so dynamic. It's not like you can say it's like this cookie cutter abuse where my dad was touching me.
Right.
It's not always like that. Sometimes it's that your father is forcing you to confess every little thing you think that isn't holy to him on a daily basis because they think that in this church, they don't think that it's okay to give like a blanket confession where you're like, I've sinned all these sins.
Yeah.
They want you to sit there and name out every single thing. You know, one of the stories I read was this dad and his son, and he's making his son tell him with painstaking detail every single thought he's had about a girl or a woman that was not pure.
No.
Right.
I can't imagine. Oh my God, I can't imagine that.
It's hard to hear it and not think that dad had a perverse motive. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm thinking about my dad, and I'm like, oh my God, if I ever had to tell my dad.
Well, he probably wouldn't want to hear it.
Okay, my dad is also, yeah. He wouldn't want to hear it. Also, he listens to the show. Hi, Daddy.
But okay. So, and you had spoken about these wisdom booklets that he has written, and in this responsibility principle, there's a wisdom booklet number 4 that kind of correlates to that. So it says in this wisdom booklet number 4, sins include such things as neglect of the Bible, unbelief, levity, and worldly mindedness, and these are all described in some detail. For example, under worldly mindedness, it says, what has been the state of your heart in regard to your worldly possessions? Have you looked at them as really yours, as if you had a right to dispose of them as your own, according to your own will? If you have, write that down, because it's a sin. If you have loved property and sought after it for its own sake, or to gratify lust or ambition, or a worldly spirit, or to lay it up for your families, you have sinned and must repent.
So wills are sinful.
So living is sinful because you have to have money and need money and want money to live. Yep. You have to need food. I mean, there's things that you must have. Yep. And according to Bill Gothard and to tell all his disciples, you're sinning by simply being alive and needing the things to survive as a human being.
Also, if you want to take care of your items that you have purchased that you have spent good money on, sinful. Don't want to do that. Yeah. What in the fuck?
The next principle is the suffering principle, and it is that people should allow the hurts from offenders to reveal quote-unquote blind spots in their own lives. Genuine joy is a result of fully forgiving offenders, and he says God has ordained that we receive grace for personal cleansing, growth, and achievement by learning how to properly respond to those who offend us, which I will probably mention later again, but is extremely offensive to a survivor of abuse who you're telling they must forgive. You're setting the grounds for forgiveness for them. Yeah. And not giving them the choice to forgive based off of the severity of the offense or how you feel or how they have responded. You know, it's extremely controlling and abusive. I
actually do have an excerpt from somebody who that is the case. And it's so weird. It's that one that I wanted to read to you last night, but I was like, nope, I'm not going to read it yet. So the ATI website does provide a wisdom booklet as an example of what goodies you can expect from the curriculum. And on the cover, it does say, character focus humility, recognizing that it is actually God and others who are responsible for the achievements in my life.
Okay, here. Okay, so I know that we have listeners who are Christian, and I am totally respectful of you, and I'm not in any way am I trying to disparage you, because I respect your beliefs, and I believe that we all have different interpretations of our spirituality.
Yep.
But I will say that there's nothing that infuriates me more than when my very Christian mother, anything bad that happens in her life is because of her downfall, and anything good that she does, anything that she has worked for super hard, studied for weeks for, things like that.
Thank God.
It's all because of God. And I'm just like, everything bad is your fault. Anything good is not up to you at all.
Listen up. Listen up. That's my next thing.
Okay.
So if you look into it a little bit deeper, it's a really, really weird and bizarre correlation to Scientology because of that. Because what about the pitfalls? Look, I'm obsessed with Scientology, and I watch every documentary I can consume about it.
Yeah.
And after doing that, I see two things that are very similar, which is one, the paywalls, which I talked about earlier. There's curriculum after curriculum designed for different stages in a male's life. And of course, a little sum for the ladies.
A little bit, yeah.
And number two, the fact that they attribute any successes that they have to their religion and any pitfalls to themselves.
I hate it.
I do too, because it's like you yourself have worked, and I understand, again, I one more time understand where you're like, all glory to God and all of that, because that was me. But give yourself credit.
Yeah.
And don't hark down on yourself too much. But anyhow, the lessons themselves do consist of very bizarre and forced attempts at inserting some sort of traditional education into biblical passages. And you get questions like, how did the Socratic method of reasoning come from a sodomite manner of living? How can graphs help you to visualize the consequences of lust? And how do prime numbers illustrate the principle of one flesh in marriage?
Can I just say, if that graph also had a correlating graph about sex education and perhaps preventive measures you could take to avoid pregnancy, maybe there wouldn't be consequences of lust.
You know we're going to get into that.
Yeah, we are.
Additionally, the creator of Cabbage Patch Kids dolls is actually a satanic wizard who implants demons into the dolls and then sneak into children's bodies while they're sleeping. I mean, this is all along with the old standard that rock music is inherently sinful. So
yeah, and and I'll mention this later, but I'm gonna say this: like, hello, we're talking about somebody who doesn't allow you to put the blame of anything on anything but yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And then he, in turn, in the same sentence, is blaming Cabbage Patch dolls, rock music, and black people, because there was a lot of it.
Yep.
For all sorts of just like inherently sinful activity.
Yep.
Okay.
Hold on, but real quick, my grandma thinks that Cabbage Patch dolls are evil.
What?
My grandma really does believe that Cabbage Patch dolls are evil, so there's that.
Wait a second. Why? Why?
I don't know.
Why?
I don't know. Them and Raggedy Ann dolls are also evil.
What has your grandma actually said about this? Like details. I mean,
I think according to her, she said something along the lines like, first, Raggedy Ann dolls. It's my grandma. I love my grandma. But Raggedy Ann dolls are, they invite the demon of poverty into your life.
oh my God. Hold on. So basically it's a classist thing. Oh my God.
Yeah. And then I think Cabbage Patch dolls, I don't know, some bullshit. My mom was trying to explain it to me, and then she was like, honestly, even my mom was like, I don't know, it's some bullshit that she came up with.
I'm pretty sure it's a matter of Cabbage Patch dolls can be bought at the plebeian Toys R Us, and we only in our family we only buy our toys at Rolf Goodman's.
Goodman's.
That store.
Oh my God.
You need an invitation to shop there. That's why you never heard of it.
That is why. So, according to an article written by a survivor, there is an emphasis on controlling every aspect of a woman's physical appearance.
Come at me.
And was central to the ATI lifestyle. Conforming to Gothard's personal tastes was an obsession shared by women and men. And this meant that wearing our hair, which is your biblical crowning glory, long, and keeping your hairs...
Keeping them hairs curly.
Keeping your curls touchably soft and loose was of utmost importance. Gothard also made it known that he strongly disliked the, quote, wet look, which is just women wearing a lot of gel in their hair. And she mentioned that she was even once pulled aside at an ATI Training Institute meeting in Oklahoma and was told to start wearing less product. She goes on to say, at church, women were supposed to wear head coverings to show our submission, though the guidelines weren't strict. So some women would just pin Kleenex to the top of their heads.
I have to say, these people probably hate Muslims too, you know?
Oh, of course. Of course. Ankle-length skirts were required for women and girls at all times. The writer of this article states, in our family, one of the more, quote, liberal in our church, they were allowed to wear pants at home.
Oh, my God.
When they weren't around other ATI families and for activities like horseback riding. But jeans were strictly forbidden.
This reminds me of a friend I had in elementary, junior high, and high school who was Pentecostal, who she wasn't allowed to cut her hair. She wasn't allowed to wear pants, but like we were in freaking high school, so she would sneak pants to school and have to change into them at school because it wasn't allowed.
Oh my God. I had a teacher actually who was, I think she was Mormon. And she wasn't allowed to wear pants, but it was okay. I mean, she was good with it because she was an adult and she made her decisions. And I swear to God, every day she wore like some sort of jean skirt.
Yeah.
Like long jean skirt.
Yeah.
She says that we girls came to learn that policing our bodies, in addition to getting married and having babies, was our primary role in life. Even before puberty, we were required to swim in oversized t-shirts and shorts that came past our knees, while boys, of course, wore regular bathing suits, and were taught wisdom by our books that, quote, when a man looks lustfully at a woman, a flood of impulses travels through the optic nerve to the back of the brain, causing testosterone to surge, violent crime to go up, and otherwise godly men to stumble. Good Lord.
We're gonna talk about this a little bit more.
Yes.
Well, of course.
Of course. Of course. In the same article, she writes that dating was out of the question, and if a young man in the church saw a young woman he was interested in, they were taught that the man should first go to his father and ask them to pray and decide whether he felt the relationship was God's will. If he decided it was, the man's father would then approach the woman's father and ask him to pray and decide if he felt it was God's will.
And if, like, a lot of these dads were molesting their kids, I'm sure they were like, nope.
Yep, exactly.
I'm not done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if both fathers were in agreement, the children would then be allowed to embark on a closely supervised courtship intended to lead to marriage. Can you imagine dating somebody with the sole purpose of saying, all right, we're going to get married?
Can you
I die.
imagine anyone you dated ever in your life and think, man, I sure wish I would have gotten married to that guy when I was 14.
My God.
No.
Oh my God. So this is kind of a funny story that's kind of like not funny.
No, I'm sure it's not funny.
The father of another girl in our church found a partner for her after becoming concerned that unmarried in her mid-20s, she was failing in her biblical mandate to have as many children as possible.
I know, old hen.
Old hen, mid-20s. At their wedding, the writer of the article says that they were all handed a printed program that explained the couple's journey to marriage and the daughter's initial resistance to her father's choice. How it like, we're getting married now. Like, you don't need to put this kind of passive-aggressive thing out there. But anyways, it explained that she had at first no interest in marrying the men her father had chosen, But after she prayed and decided that their marriage was God's will, she'd agreed to the union.
No outside influence at all.
Not at all. So, when the couple was supposed to kiss at the altar, because saving your kiss for the day of your wedding is common in ATI, and after a strained peck, the bride cringed. She pulled back, and as her new husband continued to try to kiss her, she pushed him away.
Oh, no.
How uncomfortable.
I know. That's terrible.
Now, even though women are under extreme pressure to get married, men could get a special exception to stay single if it was God's will. Gothard, Bill Gothard, who we talked about early in this episode, who actually started this whole program, was never married. And of course, he explained that away, saying that God specifically set him apart for singleness, freeing him from the obligation to get married.
So convenient. Why is everything so convenient? So all of this leads to victim blaming. Making suffering a principle of life means embracing it as a good thing, which to a degree I think could be an okay mindset. You know, we all are going to have to suffer at some points in our lives. And so when I was reading that, I was like, well, you know, like that could be okay. Mm-hmm. But in this situation, I think it's really just paving the way for abuse to go unquestioned and Gothard's followers to believe that they not only deserve what is happening to them, but that it is what has to happen so that they may live in God's grace, which is not okay, and it's abusive. It only continues the cycle of victimization by forcing victims of abuse to forgive and leave judgment up to God. And honestly, if you follow that line of thinking, if that is the case, then why do we even respect the police or the justice system, as only God can judge anybody? Judge me, everybody. So only God can judge. Why do we care? Because in his tenets, you're supposed to, and we'll talk about it a little bit at the umbrella of like authority or whatever, but you revere police and like the law. So if it's the case that only God is really able to judge any of us, and we're all supposed to defer to him for judgment of everyone that's wronged us, why is there law at all? And this also allows all kinds of abuses and punishments to be delivered upon people willy-nilly without question or consequence. So I think it's not so much of a, like, you know, bad things are going to happen and we just have to persevere. It's grooming, essentially.
It is totally grooming.
So the next principle is the ownership principle, and it's that people are stewards, not owners of their possessions. Gothard teaches that anger results from not yielding their personal rights to God, and he says that God allows us to conquer anger and worry as we acknowledge that all we have is from him and belongs to him. Based on this, we must yield our personal rights and expectations to God. I always have in my entire life found this fatalistic mindset to be really disturbing, because how can you really care about anything in the world at all if you think that things are how they are because God set his plan in place and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It is what it is. And plus the really good stuff is yet to come. So fuck this place. You know, I just never have understood that. Yep. Plus, I feel like this ownership principle really establishes a situation where hey, give me all your money is a lot easier when you're taught that it's ungodly to want or value earthly possessions, obviously. But he needs your money. Yeah. You know.
But you can't have godly or earthly possessions.
No, I can, but you can't.
No, exactly.
So the next principle is the freedom principle, and it says it is enjoying the desire and the power to do what is right. Moral purity is the result of true freedom. The key to freedom is learning how to walk in the Spirit and appropriate the victory that Christ has already won through his death, burial, and resurrection. He continues by saying, godly freedom is not the right to do what we want, but the power to do what we ought. The freedom which God designed in morals and finances is to allow us to serve others in love. So the subtext of this freedom principle is conquering moral impurity, and the main focus is control. It's controlling oneself, one's spouse, their children, everything. And total control is freedom. Slavery is freedom. And which really reminded me of 1984, George Orwell. But it's just crazy. It's like, no. I don't think that absolute control of every single aspect of your life is true freedom, just because you're telling people that. Okay, so the next principle is the success principle, in that when people learn to think God's thoughts by meditating on and memorizing scripture, they make wise decisions and fulfill their life purposes. He says we can discover God's purpose for our lives by engrafting scripture into our hearts and minds, using it to, quote, think God's thoughts, and to build a foundation for making wise decisions. The subtitle on this principle is that it's fulfilling God's priorities, which according to Gothard are living, breathing, eating, shitting the Bible, which includes he wants you to take current events and find any slight parallel to a story in the Bible it can be applied to,
God.
and then calling it a biblical prophecy. And then he wants you to memorize as much of the Bible as you can so that you may, quote unquote, engraft his word, which kind of harkens back to that lady that he had telling him he needed to memorize the Bible when he was a kid.
Yep.
He says by following these 7 steps, he guarantees that you're going to have success in life, which when defined by him means that you will witness God reproducing Christ's character in the lives of others through your life and witnesses, which sure.
Oh my
sure.
God.
His influence in the evangelical Christian world is far-reaching, as is seen by his vast numbers of political friends and allies, from Mike Huckabee to Rick Perry to Sarah Palin to the Dugars that had their own show on TLC. He believes that parents, especially fathers, should be involved in children's courtship, like Bianca mentioned earlier, and that they should have the power to say no when a man asks for a daughter's hand in marriage, which I know... The old thing is that every dude goes and asks for the daughter's hand in marriage. And I know it still happens today and people think it's very cute, but the fact that it's a requirement here is ridiculous.
That's the only way to even start dating. That's not, no.
Yeah. So the most fundamental part of Gothard's teaching is obedience. Independent thought, logic, and reason are thought of as being wrong. Starting in his basic seminar, he makes it very clear that there is a difference between knowledge and wisdom. He says that wisdom is seeing things through God's point of view, while knowledge is something that puffs men up with false pride and makes them feel important. So, I mean, I think that anybody that's been an adult in the past 10 years probably and has seen the kind of political atmosphere that is about that, there's been a lot of people in the far right that have kind of like demonized education, and I think this kind of goes along with that, where it's like anything that you learn is just puffing you up with false pride and importance. It's not what God wants you to do. It's not God's point of view. It's not God's will. So like education has kind of been demonized.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. And so going forward with this, it's important for Gothard to begin to drive this home from the get-go so that he establishes that no one else knows what God wants for their lives but him. They are indoctrinated from the beginning to distrust their own judgments, their own feelings, and their own ideas. Another thing that this establishes is an incredibly destructive sentiment that facts don't matter, which is something I think most of us have encountered with Fundies in our lifetime. I mean, I used to be very involved in politics when I was in my early 20s, and getting in arguments with people that believed this stuff was infuriating because you couldn't argue with anything because they have different facts that their reality is composed of completely different things than ours is.
Right.
So if facts don't matter, it's incredibly difficult and frustrating to try and reason with someone who thinks like that because there's nothing to base anything off of I can't talk. Anything off of.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we mentioned earlier, there are things called wise appeals in which you may question authority by going through the proper channels if you don't like what they are doing. According to the IBLP website, God requires everyone to be under authority. Children are to be under the authority and protection of their parents. Wives are to be submissive to their husbands. Employees are to be obedient to their employers. And citizens are to be in subjection to their government. As you mature in Christ, you will learn to view circumstances in life with wisdom from God. As you gain wisdom, you will become better prepared to make precise, effective appeals. All your appeals may not be granted. However, if an appeal is denied, you can be confident that any suffering you experienced as a result of standing alone and refusing to do evil is truly suffering that is for Christ's sake. So, if you make one of these wise appeals, there are 7 steps that you must go through before you can do it? Well, the first step is to be in right standing with God and with your authority. So they ask, have you been obedient to your authority? Do you have a clear conscience? And have you fulfilled your responsibilities with integrity and excellence? This obviously leads to self-introspection and attempting to get the person to blame themselves for whatever they're experiencing. There's a book published by a woman named Debbie Pearl, who was under the umbrella of these Gothard teachings, who had a book called Created to Be His Helpmeet, and she was an avid supporter of Gothard. She said, you need wisdom to see how feeling sorry for yourself is far from the heart of God.
What?
You need this gift of wisdom as a constant reminder of the limitations of your female understanding.
Oh, my limitations. I didn't think about that.
You need the precious gift of wisdom to be able to hold your tongue and be thankful when your flesh would strike in anger.
I need that precious gift of wisdom to be able to hold my fucking tongue.
When you get hit by your husband.
Yes. So, I need to be so grateful for that.
I know. Using her own sage wisdom, this bitch Debbie actually counseled a pregnant woman who was being beaten by her husband to avoid provoking him, is what she has claimed. And
okay. Okay.
I'm going to need to be told to avoid provoking your stupid ass, Debbie. Like, where are you? The second in this appeal process is have the right motives for your appeal. He says, your appeal should communicate your sincere concern for 3 aspects of your authority's leadership: his reputation, his goals, and his authority.
What?
Yep.
I'm sorry, what?
You're only...
What? Wait. I'm understanding that as I need to be making a complaint, and my complaint is I just want to protect you. Is that correct?
Well, what you should do for example, say that you're a child and you want to join a t-ball league and your dad won't let you. And so you're like, this isn't fair. I'm going to appeal to a higher authority and go above his head with the church and appeal this decision that he's made. Before you make your appeal to the higher ups in the church or the organization, you have to ask yourself if your appeal concerns your authority, which is your father's leadership, in the sense that does it concern his reputation, his goals, and his authority? Are you taking those into account? Because if you're not, then this is absolutely not something God wants you to do, because you should only be concerned about your authority's wants, needs, and desires, not your own.
Okay.
So, have fun with that.
Okay, good, cool.
And then third is to discern the appropriate time to make your appeal, then provide accurate information. 5 is have the right attitudes, which they expound a little bit more. They say, more than any other factor, a wrong attitude is the reason appeals are rejected. An effective appeal demonstrates attitudes of reverence, loyalty, and gratefulness. An effective appeal should reflect an attitude of gratefulness. In fact, gratefulness is usually a key element of an appeal. It is possible to have a grateful spirit only if you give all your expectations to God and recognize that whatever he gives is more than you deserve.
Okay.
You little shit. You don't deserve anything.
Nothing.
And anything you've gotten, you should be grateful for.
Oh my God. Okay.
6 is use appropriate words to present your appeal. 7 is respond correctly if your appeal is rejected. They say your response to an appeal that is rejected will reveal your true attitude about the situation. A gracious response not only will be a proper testimony, it also may prompt your authority to reconsider the appeal.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Also, a right response will influence your authority to be open to your future appeal. So just in case you go against your authority, I'm sure if you just have a good attitude when it's rejected, that he'll be super into you doing it in the future.
Of course.
So on Thursday, February 27th, 2014, World Magazine broke the news that IBLP Board of Directors had placed Bill Gothard on administrative leave while they undertook a review of allegations against him that he had acted in an inappropriate way and sexually harassed underage females who worked with him at the IBLP headquarters. There were over 34 women who worked with this idiot that claimed to have been harassed by him.
So he initially stepped down, but, since then, 18 former staffers, interns, and volunteers have joined a lawsuit accusing him of sexually, physically, emotionally, spiritually, or psychologically abusing them in some form or another. In many of the cases, the plaintiffs were underage at the time and had been recruited to work for IBLP by Gothard himself, additionally claiming that this indiscretion took place over several decades. Now, these allegations against Gothard were an open secret among group members for many years. As a friend who worked at ATI headquarters once said, prettiest girls were always chosen to work the closest with Mr. Gothard.
There's a definite pattern that he has put in place of finding girls at different seminars, pinpointing them, meeting them, and then calling their parents because of some special gift that they have to come work at his headquarters with him at once.
They're much closer with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
The lawsuit also claims that Gothard, who has no medical degree, provided therapeutic counseling according to his own whims and beliefs. One of the most dramatic allegations of the case involves a young woman on staff who asked for guidance on dealing with the emotional fallout of having been raped at age 11 by someone not in the organization. But the suit alleges that Gothard discouraged the staffer from seeking outside psychological treatment. He stated that a professional counselor would ruin you and all of your potential to serve the Lord, according to this woman. The lawsuit also alleges that Gothard told the woman, professional counselors do not know how to work with abused girls. Only I do. And he, even though she confided in him, decided not to report the rape to authorities based on the flip of a coin.
And we'll talk a little bit more as we go on about his ideas about what mental health is. And it's obviously not going to be anything favorable.
Of course.
Yeah.
Additionally, in May of the same year, 2014, it was revealed that, Ashley mentioned him before, 27-year-old at the time, Josh Duggar of the TLC reality show 19 Kids and Counting, and who followed the ATI's principles, had molested 5 children, including 4 of his sisters in the early 2000s. Instead of alerting authorities about this abuse, the Duggars decided to keep the whole incident private. So cool. Mm-hmm. And in a predictable and somewhat decent PR move, TLC pulled the show from its network after 10 seasons, and they aired an ad-free special dedicated to victims of molestation and abuse, which also included his sisters. Now that's cool, but hearkening back to the sickness of the cult that these people are involved in, Jessa Duggar defended her brother in an interview with Fox News' Megyn Kelly, saying, I do want to speak up in his defense against people who are calling him a child molester or a pedophile or a rapist, like some people are saying. I'm like, that is so overboard and a lie, really. I mean, people get mad at me for saying that, but I'm like, I can say this, I'm one of the victims.
Right. It's like you could never have a skewed version of events here.
Oh my God, dude. Oh my God. His own victim was like, no, I want to defend him.
Well, of course.
Of course you do.
Yeah.
Oh.
So the IBLP board issued a statement in June of 2014 stating that Mr. Gothard had acted in an inappropriate manner, and the board realizes that the seriousness of his lack of discretion and failure to follow Christ's example of being blameless and above reproach. They concluded, at this time, the board unanimously agrees that Mr. Gothard is not permitted to serve in any counseling, leadership, or board role within the IBLP ministry. They refused multiple requests from both legal teams that worked for the plaintiffs to disclose the results of their internal investigation, though, which obviously I'm pretty sure
there was some,
this whole thing was kind of just a PR move. They didn't really give two shits what he did, and they definitely didn't want to give the victims any sense of justice.
Of course.
They only wanted to make it look like, get out of here, Gothard, you're a bad guy, when they really didn't think that.
Right.
There was at least one confirmed incident where an associate of Gothard's named Gary Smalley stated that he walked into the office late one evening at 11 o'clock to see one of the young girls that was between the age of 14 and 16 that worked for Gothard as his assistants, because he had just like a slew of these girls coming in and out. And he had different girls for different time periods, like in different years. He would have them come in at 5 a.m. and they would leave around 10 to 11 p.m.
Jesus.
And anyway, so this Gary Smalley walked in one evening to find one of these girls in a skimpy nightgown sitting on Gothard's lap, which I don't know how you can even explain that away, because he's always said, nothing I did. I might have had these girls around me, but I never did anything sexual with them. And I'm not sure what them sitting on your lap in a nightgown.
Oh my God. I have no idea. No clue.
So shortly after this, on his website, Gothard posted a article, How to Guard Against the Defilement of Listening to an Evil Report, which was really just him being like, this isn't true. This has been said against me. As the allegations of sexual abuse became more widely known, the IBLP began a steady decline in members, money, and overall business. Good. On October 20th of 2015, a civil lawsuit was filed against the IBLP and its board of directors, alleging they covered up the sexual abuse of several minors in DuPage County, Illinois. Gretchen Wilkinson et al. Versus Institute in Basic Life Principles and William W. Gothard Jr., which was the lawsuit, was brought on the behalf of 5 separate female plaintiffs so that they could seek redress and damages for personal injuries based on the negligent and willful and wanton acts and omissions of the defendants with regard to sexual abuse and sexual harassment and similar allegations of malfeasance suffered by the plaintiffs. Aside from monetary damages, the plaintiffs asked the DuPage County judge to bar IBLP leaders from liquidating resources estimating over $100 million while they closed their headquarters located in Illinois and planned to relocate to Texas, which, as anyone that's ever heard anything about other cults has learned, is that this is very typical behavior. Yeah. Once they start getting a little heat from the shady shit they're doing, they want to rename themselves or relocate altogether to a different place.
They always do it.
And it makes it pretty obvious that they were running away from something or trying to cover up something. There were 5 additional accusers that joined the lawsuit in January of 2016, and even more in February, bringing the number of complainants to 16 women, girls, and 2 men before the case went to trial in April of that year, which is a lot of people. And that's just people who are bringing the lawsuit about. So in July of 2015, Gothard relaunched his website, which included several testimonials from women, one for each decade, essentially, claiming to have worked with Gothard and who had never been victim of his abuse. It's like, oh, you didn't abuse 4 of the women you worked with? By all means, why didn't you say so?
Oh my gosh, there was only 176 women that you worked with, and 4 of them wanted to come forward and say anything? Oh, okay.
To be fair, there's 8, but still. Gothard and the IBLP were sued by the group of alleged victims who accused him of sexual assault and harassment in 2016, and they described a culture within the organization wherein at-risk youth were targeted to be sexually abused, raped, and forced to work for free. In February of 2018, despite the merits of the case, the plaintiff's attorney had suggested that they discontinue their suit due to a couple of factors. One was the emotional toll that the next several months or years would take on their personal lives, and it would be a lot for them to recover from. And the second was that the attorneys were working for the plaintiffs on contingency, and with the mounting statute of limitations issues, a threatened countersuit from Gothard, and very little expected in monetary damages to cover their legal expenses, it was going to be very difficult for them to continue on. So I think that's probably the bigger issue.
Yeah, probably money was the bigger one.
Yeah, they didn't have money. So there were a few heart-wrenching weeks of consideration about what they should do, and then finally the plaintiffs agreed to drop the case with the option to refile within the next year if they so chose. What they said about this was, due to the unique complexities of this case, including the statutes of limitation, we have made the difficult decision to voluntarily dismiss our lawsuit against Bill Gothard and the Institute in Basic Life Principles. We want to make it abundantly clear that by dismissing our lawsuit at this time, we are not recanting our experiences or dismissing the incalculable damage that we believe Gothard has done by his actions and certain teachings. Nor are we disregarding that his organization chose to protect themselves instead of those under their care.
Unfortunately, that's not something that anybody pays attention to.
No.
Nobody says, oh, they dropped the lawsuit, so, but let's read why they dropped the lawsuit. Everybody's like, well, they dropped the lawsuit, so maybe they had unfounded Maybe they had unfounded accusations
Right.
or whatever. So, God, that's...
Yeah, his followers
bad.
definitely believe that they had unfounded
Of course.
accusations. Right. And they just all happen to have extremely similar timelines and corroborating stories. But there were reports that he had threatened legal action against the plaintiffs if they would not meet with him and drop the lawsuit and stop talking about it. So who knows what other factors were in play there. One of the women, Joy Simmons, who was sent to work with Gothard at the ATI headquarters in Illinois after she was sexually assaulted by a man at a Wisconsin church affiliated with the IBLP, says that Gothard would touch her while they prayed and would ask her to reveal intimate details of her sexual assault during their quote-unquote counseling sessions.
Yuck.
She said he would tell her it was her fault that she was assaulted and would ask God to cleanse her.
Yuck.
And this is a fucking... pattern of this that he continues to do this. So there's a website called Recovering Grace. Gothard Generation shines light on the teachings of ATI and the IBLP, where people who had been raised in the church or had been a part of the church at some point and had defected are now writing their stories on this website. And one of these people is named Charlotte. She is the 7th child to a pastor and his wife. They were both followers of Bill Gothard's teachings way back into the 70s. Her parents had hosted seminars for the church, for Bill Gothard's ministry, and were deeply involved in what would later become the IBLP way of life. They were among the first 100 families to put into practice the ATI homeschooling program that Gothard created. And her older brothers, who were in college at the time of that creation of the ATI homeschooling program, were pulled out of college and sent to the headquarters to start jobs in landscaping at ATI. Because that was more important.
Well, yeah. Then education, of course.
Oh, yeah. Because, education is demon shit.
Yeah, no. Can't
So
do that.
Charlotte said that her father was so entrenched in Gothard's teachings that his church board actually took issue with it, and he was eventually forced out of his church in Minnesota. Shout out Minnesota. For what he claims was the church not being willing to grow. But Charlotte has her own ideas on why this actually happened. She says that her father was a sexual predator and was forced out of the churches in California and New Jersey for for taking indecent liberties with young girls. Are we shocked that this stupid pedophile gravitated towards Gothard's bullshit church? I think not.
Nope.
Her mother turned a blind eye to it all, and eventually, when she was 7 years old and got her own room, her father began to molest her. He took her virginity when she was 8 years old.
Okay.
And sickeningly enough, he then forced her to wear a purity ring because he needed his daughter to be living under this creepy, pure umbrella, even though he was raping her. I don't understand. At 16, her family attended a conference where she met Bill Gothard, who she remembered would not let go of her hand and kept telling her parents how beautiful and pure she was, and that he would love for her to come work for him at his headquarters.
Of course he would.
Again, it's a pattern.
Yep.
A month later, she would begin working there, and Gothard wanted her to work in his personal office and work closely with him, but she initially resisted because she wanted to work outdoors with her brother, who was working landscaping.
Of course.
Obviously, it's not a typical female job in the whole IBLP ATI framework. That's man's work, but for some reason, he allowed her to do it initially. Her parents told Gothard about how she had a boyfriend who she had kissed, and they were troubled that she was an immoral sexual teenager. He told them that he would give her intensive counseling for the sinful behavior that she was exhibiting.
Oh, gross.
And during their quote-unquote counseling sessions, Gothard would ask her for details of her relationship with her boyfriend and would also play footsie with her bare feet. He would ask her for explicit as possible details of her past sexual experiences, while seeming to take pleasure in making her cry while she knelt to pray for forgiveness, and he held her hand and told her that God had bigger plans for her.
For kissing her boyfriend?
Yeah.
Oh.
Even thinking about kissing someone is a sin. Gothard knew that her father had molested and raped her, but instead of calling on her father for what he had done, he told Charlotte that it was her own doing for tempting her father in that way.
Oh my God.
Leaving him no choice but to abuse her.
Okay.
Right. It's hard for me to even be able to wrap my brain around how you can blame a child for her father raping her.
Absolutely. No.
Anyway, Gothard started picking her up for Bible study at 5:30 a.m. and making her stay to quote-unquote talk after everyone else had left. The abuse started with hand-holding, then long hugs. Then he started having her go everywhere with him, and his driver would drive them together, and witnessed them being together at all these bizarre hours of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, in a heated moment with a housemate, Charlotte mentioned the long hugs that Gothard would give her, and the housemate reported her to staff leaders.
Oh, her?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
She was disciplined for, quote, lying a few days later. And then while walking home in the evening, Gothard pulled up beside her in his car, and he told her to get in. He told her that she needed to keep what went on between them quiet, that it was their little secret, and was that clear, to which she knew that she must keep quiet.
Oh.
He invited her on a long trip to Australia where they had like a mission trip, and he had her accompany him, but then they ended up not being able to see each other very much on that trip because they were so busy. So when they came back, he began doing extended counseling sessions for her, which took place after hours at night. And that's when he really moved from the grooming stage of abuse to the actual physical stuff. He gave her cash and told her to buy push-up bras and wear them every time she was around him. He never actually wanted to see the bra itself. He just wanted to touch her over her clothes.
Fuck.
He would drive her home and hold her hand and rub her leg, telling her never to mention a word about what they did in his car. Charlotte says the situation made her feel dirty, but that at the time she also wondered if this was just how it was supposed to be with, quote, godly men. When Charlotte went home for a week that October, Gothard called her on a daily basis. When she told her mother what was happening, her mother called her a liar.
Why?
Because she's part of the church, man.
Okay.
Gothard's preaching that even thinking about kissing someone is a sin, so he's definitely not going to touch her, you know?
Yeah.
Gothard picked her up from the airport after this one trip home to see her family, and then after that, it was the first time she says that he put his hand between her legs and felt her all the way up.
Oh my God, how disgusting.
I know. Although rumors were circulating through headquarters about Charlotte and Gothard's relationship, she kept her mouth shut as she was told it was her fault that this was happening because she was the one that was tempting him, of course.
Of course.
And on top of that, he had threatened to kick her entire family out of the church if she uttered a word about what was going on between them to anyone.
Oh, poor thing.
Her brother had heard enough around headquarters that he actually went above Gothard's head to complain about it to the higher-ups. And he got her sent home for Gothard spending so much time with her, an underage girl. Before she was sent home, Gothard called her into his office where he took her into his arms, ran his fingers through her hair, and kissed her deeply on her lips.
God!
He told her
Gross.
she was his inspiration and never to forget him, and then he would never spoke or saw her ever again. But
Good.
yeah, which is actually a good development.
Yeah.
Her story was confirmed by a staff member and a contemporary of Charlotte's at the headquarters at the time named Dixie. Dixie said that at the time she worried that Charlotte was going to tarnish Gothard's reputation because of how much time she was spending with him and how much she would brag to everyone about helping him.
Oh, she was bragging. She wasn't like, he's
Help.
kind of creeping me
Yeah.
out. She wasn't like asking for help.
I'm
Okay,
all
she was
alone,
bragging.
help. Yeah.
Yep.
Being such a young girl, Dixie couldn't imagine that Charlotte was helping him too much.
Right, right.
Right.
Because she's not bragging. She's asking for help.
Yeah.
Bitch.
Bill had told Dixie that Charlotte had tattled on her, essentially, for not leading enough devotionals in their house that they lived in together, which Dixie later realized never actually happened, but that he had done that in order to build a resentment in Dixie towards Charlotte, which would caused her to not want to spend more time with her and freed Charlotte up for more alone time with Bill unimpeded. And there was another person that was able to corroborate Charlotte's account of what had happened to her at IBLP headquarters, which was a guy named Ryan, who had met Charlotte when they were both assigned to the same team when they were on a mission trip in Moscow. And although fraternizing with members of the opposite sex for anything other than the church-related business was frowned upon, Ryan had spoken to Charlotte literally one time. And in that one conversation had gathered that Charlotte had some issues with her parents who were also there with them in that mission trip. Months later, while they were at the IBLP headquarters together, Ryan witnessed Gothard and Charlotte together all the time, extremely frequently, to the point where he began to question what was going on between the two. And then he even punished himself for having those kinds of thoughts about the leader of this organization.
Yep. Of course.
He said that he and his brother would be rushing home very late at night. They would cut across the parking lot in a way that would go right in front of Gothard's office. And then Charlotte would always be there late at night in his office alone with him. Ryan says that while he did not witness any actual physical abuse, from everything he observed while at the headquarters, all the pieces would definitely fit, and he wholeheartedly believes her.
Oh, good.
Another girl named Rachel went to work at the headquarters with Gothard after they met at a conference, and he called her parents to say he wanted her to work with him, which is, again, his whole thing, that he had a whole pattern. Meet a young girl at a conference or a seminar, call her parents and tell them that she was out of this world, godly, and he needed her to come work with them, and then she was immediately sent to work with him. Since Rachel was born into the organization under strict control of her parents and was not much for being rebellious, she didn't have much to ask forgiveness for, but Gothard tried his hardest until he found something she could be guilted about, which, I mean, seriously, he's just like trying everything he can to find any remote possibility that she had sinned. Right. And so what he found with Rachel was that she liked a couple of fucking pop songs.
Oh no. Pop songs?
What a sinner.
No, pop songs.
Yet again, he would get Rachel on her knees. He would bring her to tears by making her feel guilty about her sinful ways. And then he would have her ask him for forgiveness. And this is obviously something that he got off on.
Clearly. No, I mean, yeah, there's no question about it.
He would then start to try to play footsie with her, and he would insist that she would sit with him at lunch. Eventually, he would move to sliding his foot up the back of her calf while they were sitting at the lunch table until she began pulling her feet way back behind her while she sat there to avoid his feet altogether. Him playing footsie was something that he enjoyed thoroughly with lots of girls. Yeah.
Okay.
Rachel says that Bill knew who she was with, what she talked about, all the details at all times. He completely controlled who she associated with, telling her who were bad influences and who were more godly, trustworthy sources for friendship. He once sent a boy home for simply talking to her one time.
What?
Yes.
Talking to her?
Ryan, that I just spoke about, he got sent home for talking to this girl.
Okay.
Yeah. I think Bill saw him as a threat, honestly.
I mean, it's a threat in what capacity? A threat like to
her
having viewed what happened, or like as a romantic threat?
A romantic threat.
Ugh, what a disgusting.
So Rachel says that once on a road trip, after a few hours of driving in the back of the limo with another of his assistants, Gothard leaned forward, grabbing all of her hair in his fist by the nape of her neck, and through clenched teeth said, "I love your hair."
Ew. Okay.
Okay, psycho.
Oh my God.
Take it easy. I mean, to me, that just kind of relays that he is super repressed and he's fucking psychotic.
Yeah, absolutely.
A little more on the ATI, the Advanced Training Institute International, the Christian homeschooling organization that hosts seminars worldwide and provides homeschooling curriculum and, hilariously enough, runs a paramilitary training center. And that somehow manages to beat the dorks at A&M Corps of Cadets who would go get their hair cut on a weekly basis. You're in the fucking Corps of Cadets.
You're not in the military yet.
So this ideology, this Gothard ideology, is referred to as Gothardism in the Fundie Christian circles. It teaches the umbrella of authority principle, which states that all authority comes from God, who then serves it out to mostly the fathers, and then a tiny bit to the mothers, then pastors, then come police, then high-level government officials, and then those stupid children that you keep popping out.
Oh, so women are at least above pastors and police.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Sure. It teaches unquestioning loyalty and subservience to any authority figure that Gothard has deemed to be important, which is pretty much slavery because he is making this up completely on a whim.
Yep.
It creates a situation where people with abusive tendencies or who are power hungry are gravitated towards the organization. It relies on total indoctrination of members, as any essential cult does, especially with the homeschooling curriculum. So, this ATI curriculum, it relies on total indoctrination of its members, as any essential cult does, especially with the homeschooling curriculum. Like we talked about the wisdom booklets earlier, they form the structure of the children's education, and it claims to provide practical instruction in linguistics, history, science, law, and medicine.
I read that.
But it actually contains more Bible verses than any actual information. Better yet, these Bible teachings are turned into some sort of sick manipulation that focuses on shame, fear, guilt, and self-flagellation.
That one that I was talking about earlier, like the main principle of it was mourning. And how that's Christ-like.
Yes. Okay. Look at this. In one teaching, the student is taught how to properly mourn by, by having them focus on 26 different categories of sin. Mm-hmm. The basis of all of this is that if you're suffering, it's your own fault because you're living outside of God's light. So if anything bad is happening to you, it's because of whatever you're doing that's made you live outside of God's light. Women's dress is supposed to draw attention only to her countenance or her face if you're not if you're not being a Fundie tryhard, and should have no bright colors, logos, or anything obscene like that to draw attention to her body. These types of things are called quote-unquote eye traps by Gothard, and they create situations in which women quote-unquote defraud men by making them lust after something they can't have.
Oh my God, I can't. I fucking can't.
Gothard is the OG of telling women to smile, as
lady.
Part of his whole fucking thing is a sad countenance demonstrates a selfish spirit because it forces the sympathies of others to determine what trouble is at the root of the frown. Observers tend to look away from a frown because it makes them feel awkward.
Oh my God.
So yeah, oh well, then by all means, let me smile some more so that you don't have to go through the trouble of feeling awkward, you little bitch.
Oh my God. And my RBF, I must be making people feel awkward.
Don't make people feel awkward.
I'm sorry. It's my bad.
The followers as a whole are taught how to present themselves both physically and in attitude, all entirely to present a specific idea to everyone else, not to relay how they really feel inside. Living a life essentially denying your emotions, feelings, thoughts, which, as we all know, leads to a healthy adult human being. Mm-hmm. So obviously, there's no sex education because then the women might realize they don't have to be walking, talking fuck toys and baby ovens from the time they get their period.
Jesus.
Plus, the church teaches that women don't have sex drives, LOL. and simultaneously teaches that men have uncontrollable sex drives, opening them up to a quick, uncontrollable rape the minute a bepermed woman's kneecap gives him a softy wink. Essentially, it's just telling boys, listen, you have no control of your actions. Just blame those whores tempting you with their existence.
Listen, Ashley, hold on. Sex workers. Mm-hmm. Not whores. Sex workers.
Okay, sure. I'm sure that's what they call them. And I'm talking...
I'm just kidding.
Every woman in existence. It also advises for a strict no computer policy for boys, but it does not implement the same policy for girls. Along the same vein, Gothard encourages men to turn towards the wall at restaurants so that they are not quote-unquote tempted by the waitress or any other whore trying to flash her shoulder at him in the restaurant.
So rude, shoulders.
Yes, I know. Those tempty shoulders. Of course, the burden of control, even of the man's goddamn actions, is in the hands of the women, as they are taught that they are to keep men's desires from turning into lust, or worse yet, sexual activity. In an ATI wisdom booklet number 36, students are taught that if a woman doesn't cry out while she is being raped, then she is equally guilty with the attacker.
Okay.
And this has been told to actual people who have been raped and who Gothard knew this happened, and he said, did you cry out? Well, if not, you're just as guilty.
You're just as guilty.
Mm-hmm. Girls are taught it is their sin if they cause a man to lust after them, which is just kind of teaching a self-loathing from a very early age, as if we don't have enough of that. Even though I feel like my blood is boiling in my veins at this point, I must continue. As girls are also taught from very early on that they must be submissive in all things they do. They must never initiate conversation with a goddamn man, and must surely never correct a man if he is wrong, because he may feel bad about himself. And God knows he can't handle that.
No.
That burden lies on the women because they're just too stupid.
No, we're dumb.
Mm-hmm. As anyone with half a brain could surmise from the information thus far, this paves the way for girls to be victims of sexual abuse, as they are taught to obey men, be submissive to them, never question them, and also on top of that, don't learn even a bit about sex so that you don't know what's really going on whenever the predator starts predating you.
Mm-hmm. So this combination of zero sexual knowledge and deeply ingrained submissiveness leads to many young girls, especially vulnerable to sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. Because of the isolation added from homeschooling, the vulnerability to abuse increases dramatically. And clearly there are no teachers or school counselors to confide in. So abuse tends to continue throughout adolescence. And the only hope of escape for young women is through courtship. And of course, the eventual marriage to a man who would immediately impregnate her, and she would relinquish all sexual control, thus perpetuating the cycle.
Right. Sadly, it's immediately transferring the authority, quote unquote authority, that she has been told since she was a child of her father. It transfers that from her father to her husband, and they never get to have any agency themselves. Brooke Arnold was a woman who was raised in the IBLP, the church, or whatever you want to call it. As a teenager, she started to become acutely aware that many of her friends were being molested by older brothers or their fathers. She says that since there was no sex education and they really had no idea what was going on or how to talk about it, her friends would attempt to discuss it in stilted, whispered hints with vague terms, and that was really the extent of it. So they didn't even know what to say was going on with them because they were left in the dark that much about sexuality.
Jesus, that's so sad.
There was a girl named Johanna, whose father physically abused her for years. And when she went to her pastor, the pastor of her church, it was an all ATI congregation, the pastor told her it was because she was not submissive enough to her father. Fuck my life, dude.
I mean, dude.
So according to Brooke, in an article for Salon.com, the ATI's theological beliefs and practices cultivate an environment where women and children are more vulnerable to rape and sexual abuse, which is not any surprise to anyone listening, I'm sure. More than just a homeschooling curriculum, the teachings cover every facet of its members' lives. It is a fully institutionalized religious sect with incredibly strict rules that more often than not reflect the leader's preferences versus anything actually biblically stated, as we have already talked about. Like we've said, Gothard preferred permed hair, so he had almost all the girls wear curly hair. He said it brings out their natural beauty. Again, we already talked about it, but he said the creator of the Cabbage Patch dolls was satanic, and that there were demons in the dolls who then transferred to the kids while they were sleeping. He also said that the antiquated dress for women and girls was what they needed to wear because it was the most comely thing they could wear. And the forced homeschooling, the prohibition of birth control, and the strict gender-divided labor rules were all things that Gothard had as a preference, not actually anything the Bible states should be the case. One of the cornerstone beliefs of the ATI is that God appoints a husband in an umbrella of authority, like we mentioned a little while ago, over their wives, who are told that they must obey the husband completely. And this includes sexually and reproductively speaking, which really boils down to a woman's body belonging to her husband, not herself. It leads to abuse, spousal rape, emotional abuse, and consent is irrelevant unless the man chooses to not be a piece of shit. It's really not a point of contention as far as he is concerned for most of them.
So women aren't allowed ownership of their own thoughts either through ATI. At annual ATI conferences, married women are separated from everyone else and asked if they are having thoughts about using birth control.
How dare you? How dare you?
Or if they feel resentment about having so many children. And answering yes to this, someone might actually tell you that these thoughts come from demons whispering into their ears. Let's go. What woman honestly doesn't feel like after so many fucking kids, like, okay, this is enough. I've had 12.
You would think.
And it's like wreaking this absolute havoc on my body.
Most girls in ATI are expected to become a wife and a mother via a courtship process facilitated, as we spoke about earlier, by the father. There is an absolute unquestioned authority of the father in the home, and the women working outside of the home is strictly forbidden. Some women are required to get the husband's permission before they get a goddamn driver's license.
Because, God forbid, you drive to the goddamn grocery store.
Goddamn.
Goddamn God.
Damn. One of the because if you're able to drive yourself places, then you might be able to tempt men all over the city.
Oh my God, that's true. I didn't even think about that.
Mm-hmm. One of the main tenets repeated over and over, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is Genesis 28, which says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every creature that crawls upon the earth.
Okay. This premise and the belief that women's sole purpose are to raise children and to provide even more children to their husband under God's command, again, like we talked about before, does include the absolute sexual and reproductive submission of the woman's body, and inevitably leads to things such as the sanctioning of spousal rape.
Right.
Which I myself didn't know was a thing until maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that spousal rape was a thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't, just because I am with you doesn't mean you have the right to do whatever you want with me at any whim.
Absolutely. That you have.
And so, without being able to use birth control and being told that they must populate the earth with followers of Gothard so that they may take dominion over the world.
Most families, according to a survivor, lived 2 parents and 10 children to a single wide trailer, in stark contrast to the Duggar family, who were super prominent.
Yeah.
And usually they were wearing very threadbare clothing, looking malnourished due to the abundance of starchy meals on a one-parent income. Don't forget, women are second to men and need to raise their children. They are also strictly forbidden to work outside of the home, no matter what the financial situation of the family is.
Yeah. Children are turned into some kind of evidence of the masculinity of each male in a much more amplified way than in secular society, even though that happens very much as it is. But saying that essentially you're showing your godliness by reproducing is kind of a point in the masculinity scale for you. Yeah. So this Duggar having 19 kids is, he's godly as fuck to this organization. Brooke Arnold, the girl that we mentioned earlier, who was raised under the umbrella of Bill Gothard's teachings in the ATI, she asked the question, how fragile is the boundary between a woman's loss of her reproductive control over her body and the loss of her sexual control over her body? She says in her experience in the ATI culture, it is very, very slim, as, you are essentially giving your entire person over to your husband. Once these women have a child, they are instructed to do something Gothard calls blanket training, where a baby is placed on a blanket. In some cases, it is then enticed with a toy or a rattle to crawl off of the blanket, and in others, the parent just waits for it to do so, and then they are slapped or hit with or hit with a rod when they attempt to leave the blanket as part of training discipline in kids that are too young to even crawl or talk.
Oh my God. Listen up. I don't like kids.
No.
But that's fucked.
I know. This kind of abusive training is used and advocated by many of his followers, including that hoe Debbie Pearl that we talked about earlier, who said to the pregnant woman that she needed to stop provoking her abusive husband, and a bunch of other fundies like the Duggars who also utilize that blanket training. So it's like, you're not old enough to really understand anything, but you're going to understand
hitting. For sure.
Well, you're going to understand my authority, and you're going to understand how to listen to me, and you're going to understand that you need to stay on that blanket because I'm going to hit you enough times when you try to get off of it, even though you're a 1-year-old. Yep. So, to carry on, Gothard, we talked slightly about his ideas about mental illness earlier, but to expand on that a little more, he teaches throughout his materials that the causes of mental illness are guilt, irresponsibility, believing lies, fear, inanimate objects, and psychiatric fallacy. He emphasizes that the individual who has a problem is at fault, and he recommends self-examination, prayer, and taking back strongholds as a way to overcome them. On BillGothard.com, he states the following, that mental health issues are caused by guilt. He emphasizes that guilt is the main reason anyone feels stress, which develops into mental dysfunction such as depression or anxiety. He says finding the root of the problem and fixing it will alleviate the guilt, which will lead to moral freedom. He wrote an entire book on the theory that lies can cause disease called How to Resolve the 7 Deadly Stresses, with a workbook that was titled The Lies We Believe Cause Stress and Disease. Okay. Some of the problems listed in the book are 1, using our intellect to question. That's a mental health issue. Choosing to believe lies, and I find that to be extremely rich coming from the liar king himself, and culture. And he says in order to combat these problems, he's created 7 power statements, that you're supposed to repeat to yourself throughout the day. It's like some of the stuff I wouldn't be so opposed to if you weren't a psychotic, abusive cult leader. Yeah. Additionally, he wrote that painful memories are caused because you had an incorrect response to an offense. So if you are pained by anything that has happened to you, it's because you responded to that inappropriately. Remember back that, in what we said before, that in this cult's basic principles, blaming the victim for abuse or aggression from one's spouse is essentially gospel. And yet again, as if you have, when you have painful memories, you need to go back and revisit that offense that was made against you. You need to learn why God allowed those hurtful events to take place. And then, of course, you need to thank him for handing it down to you.
Okay.
Because suffering is godliness. Then you have to discover the benefits of the offense. Bless and forgive the offender, and then ask forgiveness for your offenses.
Okay.
Which obviously include causing the offender to offend against you in the first place, you stupid dick. In a YouTube clip of one of his seminars, Gothard is telling an anecdote about a Jewish psychiatrist who, quote, made a statement and demonstrated through his work that much of what we call mental illness, schizophrenia and so on, is not mental illness at all. It's varying degrees of irresponsibility. If we allow ourselves to act irresponsibly, we will soon begin to think incoherently. Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So schizophrenia is all just because you're an irresponsible human.
Well, then my schizophrenia is late onset. Fuck me.
Gothard,
Jesus Christ.
He's a really cool dude. Gothard has given statements various times discussing how he has counseled many people who have received psychiatric or psychological treatment and that they always got worse after receiving that treatment.
What?
He says, it's so easy to say the devil made me do it. We want to have a person deal with their own responsibility, not blaming their parents, not blaming the devil. Again, coming from the guy who made people purge their homes of Cabbage Patch dolls and rock music because they were filled with demons, it's pretty rich. This would obviously have a devastating effect on members of his organization who have mental illness and also those who have, within the organization itself, experienced abuse and trauma because of the goddamn organization and its tenets who are then unable to receive the recovery and help that they need because Gothard, in all his infinite wisdom, says it's their own fault that they are experiencing these issues to begin with. You can imagine how that could cause some distress. And again, what I kind of noticed in reading about Gothard is that he really nitpicked little tiny bits of information from various sources, took one sentence, no context whatsoever, and then applied it. And because this psychiatrist that he named said this one statement, he has no idea anything else the psychiatrist said, but he frames an entire movement based off of one statement. He just nitpicks. He picks and chooses. I mean, I guess it's pretty common. So, as is to be expected, growing up in the ATI and the IBLP is an isolating, abusive experience. Like with any cult, it is extremely difficult to break away from the indoctrination that takes place, and when a lucky individual does manage to get out, they are thrust into a world wholly unprepared for the realities of what real life is like outside of the church. When someone leaves the church, they are often excommunicated from their families altogether, and this will often also happen from simple criticizing of the organization or even questioning of a leader.
It sounds a lot like Scientology.
Yep. Like every other cult that I've ever read about. And families will also deny and minimize allegations of abuse that their children bring about. A website and a support group for survivors of the IBLP, ATI, and Bill Gothard, which I talked about earlier, called Recovering Grace, where there are many individuals who have left the organization, have shared their stories, and they go there to support one another. They have been harassed by a small group of loyal Gothard followers, and because of this, many of the people who speak out against Gothard publicly and to the media tend to not want their last names revealed, and others will only talk off the record because they feel threatened by Gothard and his little cronies, which again is very similar to every other cult that I've ever read about.
The gang stalking that Scientologists do is very similar to this.
Right. And I read some supporters of him talking about the victims who came out and had the civil lawsuit against him and how the fact they dropped it was proof that there was nothing that actually happened. It's kind of like with Bill Cosby, where so many people came out over various decades accusing you of doing so the acts, the times, everything is so similar. There's so many corroborating stories that how can you seriously say over 34 people are lying about this man?
Right.
And they all just happen to have very similar stories where he picks them out and grooms them like a motherfucker. You know, like it's just not.
Absolutely.
It's cognitive dissonance if you're going to sit here and try to tell me that this man hasn't done anything. Besides the fact that even if there isn't physical proof of him physically abusing people, the way that he teaches people how to treat themselves and others is abuse in itself. And it's inflammatory enough that this alone should be reason to fucking burn this guy at the stake. 'Cause he's a witch. A dirty witch. So
not a good witch.
Not a good witch. So today, Gothard has since started a new ministry called Life Purpose Power Teams. It sounds just like such a corporate training situation. Like all his names are
Power
just so.
teams.
I guess they have to be kind of ambiguous. Like they can't be like God, abuse. On his website, he includes 8 testimonials, all from women who detail working closely with him and him never acting inappropriately. He says that he is including them because they wanted to do so to dispel what he claims are false allegations. And
they wanted to do it.
Yeah, never mind all those 60 women accusing him of misconduct. They're all liars, you know? Nope. But like, anyone should know, an abuser does not go around abusing every person they meet. A pedophile does not molest every child they come in contact with, and you bet your ass that they groom the fuck out of the parents and everyone else that they're not abusing to make themselves seem like they're not abusers.
Like that documentary. What was it? What was it called?
I never watched it.
Girl. You have to.
Now I'm like, ugh.
It's going to make you so upset. I mean, maybe don't watch it, but it's like, what's it called? It's called Abducted in Plain Sight.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ. I don't know how many people just yelled at me.
Tons.
So many people just yelled at me saying, it's Abducted in Plain Sight. I know. Sorry. It took me a minute.
So there is a National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse who has an article about grooming and how child molesters create willing victims. And in this article, it says, it is our experience that the quote, grooming a child is only half the story. Many pedophiles are extremely clever, often charming, patient people, frequently thought of as among the most valued of community members. That's because they spend a lot of time grooming the parents, friends, and neighbors of the children around them, just as they groom the kids themselves. It is not unusual for pedophiles to pick careers and or volunteer positions that will deliberately place them in close proximity to the youngsters they crave. They'll then proceed to impress or groom the adults around them by becoming the most reliable on-call volunteer, the most generous friend, the most giving neighbor, or the favorite relative. Their presentation makes them seem to be completely sincere among the most trustworthy and valuable community members. Parents of molested kids will often be shocked at their own naivety, but pedophiles are as clever as can be in grooming the adults around them as well. So the logic that Gothard is trying to use here is that because he didn't abuse these 8 women who had left him testimonials on his website throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he simply could not have abused the over 60 individuals who accused him of doing so is extremely flawed. It doesn't fit with what we know about abusers. There are plenty of witnesses to corroborate many of his accusers' accounts of extreme amounts of attention from the much older Gothard, and it is clear from many people he surrounded himself with throughout many decades that he paid inappropriate amounts of attention to certain young girls, for certain, which he even admitted himself. On top of that, his ministry teaches and practices abuse, as we've outlined here today. That alone is horrific in its dehumanization and in the trauma it causes, which is then blamed on the one experiencing it because Gothard says. The fact that this corrupt and evil man was able to get entrenched in the lives of so many and extend his influence into the sphere of U.S. politics is extremely troubling, to say the least. This is yet another sordid story of a sick and twisted man using his power and influence to fool and abuse people, for whatever reason, that do not have the ability to see him for what he is. So fuck Bill Gothard, the ATI, the IBLP, any adults who adhere to his teachings and carry on a cycle of abuse with their children. Fuck all y'all. When you surround yourself with people who only think and act and believe just as you do, and you're all under a creepy umbrella of a cult leader who espouses mumbo jumbo, causing you to deny reality and truth and give in to some seriously depraved behavior because they've got their ear to God's lips, so believe it or get out, then you're a cult and you need to get out of it and you need to stop abusing your children.
Absolutely. The sources for this episode come from the book A Matter of Principles by Don Venant, Gawker.com, TheGuardian.com, Salon.com,
Wikipedia, and TheNewRepublic.com, the New York Daily News, the NAASCA.org, RecoveringGrace.org, MNCriticalThinking.com, and ThePewForum.org.
Thank you guys so much for joining us on this particular episode. I know that Christianity doesn't seem like it can become a cult, but there are a lot of things within this particular sect of Christianity that are definitely cult-like behavior.
Yeah, totally unacceptable. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Have a great life. Have a great everything. We'll see you later, Cooper.
Bye.